The negotiations in Egypt between Hamas and Israel with mediation by a high-level team from the Trump administration in the United States, as well as other countries, are underway. So far, Hamas is not treating this deal like take it or leave it proposition that President Trump said it was when he put it on the table during his joint press conference with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House on September 29th. In fact, they are making demands to amend some of the most important points of this plan, including a demand that the IDF forces will fully withdraw from the Gaza Strip as soon as the last hostage has been released. Discussion of these disputed points has been postponed to later this week, but there is nonetheless some cautious optimism in Israel after day 2 of the talks, and President Trump also told reporters that he is pretty sure we will succeed in reaching an agreement in Gaza. On that note, delegations from Turkey and Qatar are also set to arrive in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt to join the negotiations, and we'll take a closer look at the effect that this is likely to have. And in related news, yet another flotilla is headed towards the Gaza Strip, and the Israeli Navy is preparing to intercept it. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host Yair Pinto, back from a few days of vacation, and with me today is Shoshani to help bring you all the truth about what is happening in Israel. As of today, the IDF holds all the entrances to the Gaza city and is instructing the remaining civilian residents to move south. There is also cautious optimism after day 2 of the talks in Egypt, but the negotiations are likely to reach the decisive stage this evening. According to sources familiar with the details, Khalil al-Khayria, one of the Hamas officials who survived the assassination attempt in Doha, Qatar, has hardened its positions. Also, a senior Hamas official said that the release of the last hostage must take place in parallel with the withdrawal of the IDF forces. And also, Hamas is demanding the release of some of the most senior terrorist leaders who are serving life sentences in Israeli prisons, including Marwan Barghouti, the planner of the Park Hotel attack, and many other atrocities. Will they insist on these conditions, or can the Egyptian, Turkish, and Qatari delegates convince them to stop playing games and take the deal? We'll soon find out. In any event, President Trump sent a letter to thank the families of the hostages who nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. He also announced this week that the deal goes beyond Gaza, with the entire Middle East wanting it, even Iran. But not so fast. On Tuesday, the IDF intercepted no less than 4 UAVs, suicide drones, that were launched at the Red Sea resort city of Eilat in the south by the Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen. Also on Tuesday, the IDF eliminated 2 Hezbollah terrorists in southern Lebanon and arrested suspects trying to smuggle weapons into Israel from the Syrian territory. So even if the war in the Gaza Strip might be about to end, there are other active fronts which are still running hot. Speaking of which, TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Shoshani will explain today how commercial sanctions on Iran will be executed. American forces are actually preparing to stop Iranian merchant ships, while the Ayatollah regime threatens that any action against Iran's merchants and civilian ships will be met with immediate response. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what's happening in Israel on day 733 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region acting under the control of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we begin, I want to ask you to find the subscribe button and click on it if you haven't already, so that you'll stay tuned to the truth in real time and never miss another episode on Boots on the Ground. Every day, a flood of lies about Israel is being spread. People sit in TV studios and spread lies. So we, at Boots on the Ground, decided that we will be a frontline pillar for the truth, bringing only what's really happening in Israel. And now, we'll start with a look at the diplomatic developments over the last 24 hours. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, published a map to which Israel agreed, according to which the IDF will remain in 70% of the territory of the Gaza Strip, as it was at the end of Operation Gideon's Chariots A. According to Trump's announcement, After negotiations, Israel agreed to the initial withdrawal line from the Gaza Strip and said when Hamas approves the proposal, the ceasefire will take immediate effect and the exchange of hostages and also prisoners will begin. However, Hamas has not yet given its consent to the withdrawal lines. The map to which Israel agreed shows a withdrawal of IDF forces to the areas they held before Operation Gideon's Chariots. The areas where the IDF is expected to remain include parts of Khan Yunis, Rafah, the Philadelphia corridor, the extensive areas in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, including Sajaiya and Dar Shtufa. The IDF will also remain in the perimeter from the north of the Gaza Strip to its south. Following Washington's directive to halt strikes in the Gaza Strip as part of the advanced contacts for hostage deal releases, the IDF forces located in the Gaza Strip are compelled to remain in defensive positions without advancing or initiating offensive action. However, in the security establishment, there is concern that the static presence of forces in hostile territory may increase the risk of casualties and surprise attacks by Hamas terrorists. This situation requires very high discipline and the ability to withstand pressure, as the commanders and their main fear on the ground is the attempts by Hamas cells to exploit the lull to approach IDF positions, plant explosives, or carry out sniper fire. In addition, there is a persistent threat and concern about attempts to kidnap soldiers amidst the volatile situation. In parallel, the Air Force continues to provide aerial protection, but there too, the activity is now focused on force protection only, including monitoring, warning, and responding only in the event of an immediate threat. So the IDF emphasizes that the soldiers are preparing for any kind of scenario, but they also know that the current situation involving prolonged presence in hostile territory without movement is one of the most dangerous and complex for our troops. However, the wait for Hamas's final answer on the outline of the deal continues, and in the meantime, the forces on the ground continue to maintain high alertness and readiness. Speaking of which, 5 divisions are operating in the area, including 3 inside Gaza City and 2 in the perimeter and on the city's outskirts. The IDF emphasizes that there is no preparations for ending the war and withdrawing or folding our forces at this time, but the maneuvering forces are stopping and not advancing. They are on defensive positions and missions only. If a threat is identified, then there is an option to strike and thwart that threat. And this happened several times in the last 24 hours alone. And here, at Boots on the Ground, we will continue to bring you all the information straight from the field in the Gaza Strip. So keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. And most importantly, don't forget to click that subscribe button so that you remain tuned to the truth of what's happening in Israel, Boots on the Ground style. And speaking of Boots on the Ground, I want to speak to you for just a moment about what it's like to live in Israel at this time. It hasn't just been about physical recovery. It's about people trying to rebuild from the ground up. So many hard-working Israelis, especially small businesses, business owners, had their lives turned upside down. Some were called to reserve duty for months at a time, while others had to leave their homes for extended periods because they were under fire. Many lost months of income almost overnight. Now, they're trying to start again by reopening their businesses, restocking shelves, and getting back to doing what they love. But it's not easy, and they need help. That's why Arza exists. Arza partners directly with these small businesses, buying their handmade goods and delivering them in beautiful boxes to homes around the world. Each box helps real families get back on their feet. It puts money in the hands of those working hard to recover with dignity, not with charity. So if you want to be part of this effort, go to www.arzabox.com/TBNIL and use the code TBNIL to get an extra 10% off of your subscription. Again, that's www.arzabox.com/TBNIL. One box, one family, one step closer to rebuilding. Now, let's move to the latest developments in the talks between Hamas and Israel. The talks in Sharm el-Sheikh on United States President Donald Trump's plan to end the war resumed on Tuesday, exactly 2 years since the October 7th massacre. While Israeli officials would like to limit the talks to a few days, it is still unclear what time frame was allotted for the current round of negotiations with Hamas under the shadow of the threat to return to the fighting if contacts fail. The assessment is that the talks will continue for a few more days, and according to one of the central clauses in Trump's plan, Hamas must release all the 48 hostages, living and fallen, within 72 hours, and at the same time the IDF will withdraw to the yellow line. But Hamas now says that it will not agree to release them all before a full IDF withdrawal. Furthermore, according to reports, the list of prisoners whose release Hamas demands includes some very high-profile terrorists, including Marwan Barghouti, Ahmed Sadat, Hassan Salameh, Abbas El-Sayed, and others. In parallel, an Israeli political source said at the end of the day of consultations that envoy Steve Witkoff was expected to arrive in Sharm el-Sheikh on Wednesday together with Jared Kushner, as well as Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer. According to the source, there is cautious optimism at the moment that the negotiations are progressing, but we must be very careful because Hamas at any moment can complicate matters and backtrack. He added that the direction is positive, although the day of talks has ended. Side-room conversations continue, and there are still gaps. On issues at the level of the delegation that is there now, there is progress, but as noted, at any stage, Hamas can flip. According to a report on Egypt's El Rai channel, the second day of meetings ended after about 5 hours of discussions, and according to sources, Hamas insists on a complete halt to the fighting before the hostages are released. And meanwhile, sources told Qatar's El Arabiya media portal that delegations from Qatar and from Turkey will arrive in Sharm el-Sheikh within hours to participate in the negotiations. Hamas insists that Israel present a clear timetable for a full withdrawal from the Gaza Strip and request guarantees regarding implementation of the agreement's clauses after the end of the first stage. In addition, they noted that the second day of negotiations focused on examining the maps of the Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip within the framework of the first stage. Elsewhere, Sky News Arabia reported that Turkey's intelligence chief Ibrahim Khalin will arrive in Egypt to join the mediation efforts, and the Saudi portal Ashrak al-Awsat reported, citing an Egyptian source, that a preliminary agreement may be reached on Thursday or Friday, and Trump will announce it. According to him, if there are obstacles, the final decision may be delayed until Sunday at the latest. And according to the report, Hamas confirmed its willingness to hand over all hostages and detainees in their wards, living and dead. But Hamas also demands clarification regarding the mechanisms and the steps required to implement President Trump's plan, and guarantees that Israel will not return to striking in Gaza. The problems that arise are many, and they may hinder the continuation of the negotiations pertain to the following issues: release of the living hostages, release of the fallen hostages, the issue of withdrawal, the issue of weapons, and the issue of ending this war. So let's take a closer look at these points, starting with the release of the hostages. Hamas had confirmed it holds 20 living hostages whom it can release immediately within hours. However, Khalil al-Hayat demands release in stages in accordance with the IDF's withdrawal. The Americans made clear to the Qataris and the Turks mediators that they refuse and that all living hostages must be released in a single batch at the same time. The fallen hostages are more complex because, according to the security sources, Hamas does not know and does not even have full access to all 28 sets of body remains. A security source says Hamas claims that some of the bodies are buried in areas under IDF control, and at the moment, we're checking these matters. Next, there is the matter of the release of the terrorists. According to security officials, the dispute over the issue of releasing the security prisoners is not dramatic, adding that once we agree to release a life-sentence prisoner, the numerical matter is less dramatic. After all, the difference between 100 prisoners and 150 is already secondary. we will know how to handle any number of releases as a security system. Next, there is the issue of withdrawal and weapons. President Trump presented a withdrawal map, and Israel announced that it accepts it. But currently, members of the Hamas leadership abroad are trying to influence and condition the release of the hostages and the pace of the withdrawal of the IDF forces. Hamas is also trying to demand that some of the weapons, both organizational and personal, remain in the hands of Hamas senior leaders who will remain in the Gaza Strip for self-defense purposes. Israel and the United States oppose this. Finally, there is the issue of ending the war. And here too, there is an American statement that Israel can live with. American pressure is the key to the results of the negotiations this week, and Israeli officials assess that the fact that the Americans recruited Turkey into the talks is a positive move. Right now, Turkey is waiting for an American decision regarding a massive arms deal that would allow the upgrade of the Turkish Air Force. This is a highly significant pressure lever on President Erdogan of Turkey, who has a particularly great amount of influence over Hamas leaders abroad. The assessment in Israel's intelligence echelon at this stage is that the pressure emanating from the military leadership in Gaza, which fears reaching a situation in which it will be required to surrender with a white flag alongside American pressure on Qatar, Turkey, and Egypt, will lead to the signing of an agreement before the end of this week. However, there are many different ways that this could still go off track. So, please guys, keep these talks in prayer. On that note, it's also important to point out that President Trump reiterated on Monday evening his optimistic messages regarding the possibility of reaching a deal that would bring about the release of all the hostages in the Gaza Strip and bring an end to this war. The American president added that the United States also received a strong signal from Iran that it wants the war to end. In his words, "We have everyone on our side. There has never been anything like this. This is beyond Gaza. It's peace in the Middle East. Every Arab country wants it." Turkish President Erdogan is fantastic, a strong man who is pushing hard for a deal. Hamas has respect for him and for Qatar as well, and for the Emirates, and also for Saudi Arabia. This is according to President Trump. President Trump was also asked in a conversation with reporters in the Oval Office whether he is in contact with the families of the hostages, and he replied that he is. "They are so happy they can't breathe," he said. "It is very sad when you have hostages and also fallen." We have a fantastic team working on it. Witkoff, Jared. We have an A+ team. The American president also rejected the report that he told Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to stop being negative about the deal, saying he's very positive about this deal. Israel is great. We have red lines if certain things are not met, but I think that Hamas agrees to very important things. In Israel, there is cautious optimism, and they detect exceptional determination from the Americans and the mediators, but they are not sure what that means regarding Hamas. Something that may become clear in the negotiations very soon. Hamas may raise more problematic demands regarding prisoner lists, IDF withdrawal lines, and the timelines for the release of the hostages. But unlike previous times, this time there is a commitment by the mediators to pressure Hamas not to ruin the opportunity, including an ultimatum to organization members that if they do not accept Trump's plan, they risk expulsion from Qatar and also from Turkey. It's difficult to imagine anyone else except perhaps Iran who would be willing to take them in at this point. In any case, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on everything that's happening in Israel. That is what is so important for us, that you hit that subscribe button and stay tuned to the truth. Share these videos with your friends. This is the battle that Israel needs you in, sharing the truth. And now, let's move to TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst, Mati Shoshani, who will give us a detailed report on where Iran stands in the last week and why it has recently returned to threatening the United States openly. Mati, what can you tell us?
On the show tonight, Iran raises the temperatures at the Red Sea. The IRGC warns Washington over any move on Iranian shipping. Tehran pushes past U.S. sanctions, and its partners in the Red Sea keep getting help to circumvent the sanctions. what changed this week, and what it means for this region. Let's break it all down over the next couple of minutes. Something dramatic is happening on the Red Sea. The Iranians are threatening the US and its allies, stating that any attack on Iranian surface vessels would be responded with an immediate attack or an immediate response. Now let's backtrack for just a second to explain how we got to this tense moment on the high seas. The first thing to remember is that just a week ago, the snapback mechanism kicked into action, imposing new and very dramatic sanctions on the Iranian regime. And the Iranians are trying to continue doing what they've done up till this point. And what that is using what is known as the shadow fleet. Those are ships that are falsely marked as other nationalities, or they're hiding the true cargo in those ships. And that is an attempt that's been ongoing for years by the Iranian regime to ship oil, crude oil specifically, to countries around the world to circumvent the sanctions. But in this new snapback mechanism, the US is publicly and clearly calling out the Iranians and saying, guys, we know how you're bringing in the money. We know how you're circumventing the sanctions, and we know who you're doing this with, and we will seize those vessels. Now, it's important to note that an important part of the snapback mechanism is that it allows let's call it the ally forces related to the sanctions on the Iranians, this is the US and several other countries, it allows them to stop Iranian ships in sea while they're in transit, board them and find out what they're carrying. And the purpose of that is to prevent them from circumventing the sanctions that are imposed against Iran. Now let me remind you all that the lifeline of any global economy in this day and age is their ability to bring in foreign currency and specifically to trade with the US dollar. And the Iranians being pushed out of the banking system, having heavy sanctions imposed on them, right now they have a serious problem in getting cash into their quickly depleting bank accounts. The way to get around those sanctions is for them to sell their goods, and specifically crude oil, to other countries at a discounted rate to circumvent the sanctions. The way they're doing that is they're selling to the Chinese, to the Indians, to several other countries for cash that's moved in suitcases or in other ways that help them get around the very heavy US and of course the E3, the countries that are behind the snapback mechanism, that's the British, the French, the Germans. It helps them get around those sanctions. Part of the snapback mechanism is now allowing those countries to quickly, swiftly seize those ships and prevent the Iranians from bringing in cash. And the Iranians are not happy with the situation, and they are fighting back, making some very serious public threats, stating that anyone who dares touch their fleet will be immediately responded to. Connected to this entire sanctions and shadow fleet story is the question of Iranian ballistic missiles. Now, in a recent interview, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu leaked information stating that the Iranians are deep in development of a new intercontinental ballistic missile program with a range of up to 8,000 kilometers. That's, for those of you speaking freedom units, that's about 5,000 miles. And what that means is that possibly New York and Washington, D.C. could be in range of Iranian ballistic missiles. Now, let me tell you something. That number and that range are not arbitrary at all. The Iranians are signaling to the world with every possible means that they have, be careful, we're going crazy. They want everyone to back down because the sanctions are hurting, the military pressure is hurting them, and they are trying to do everything they can to push back on both the sanctions, the diplomatic and the military pressure that they've been experiencing for months now, since that June attack or 12-day war where Israel and the US struck deep in Iran. The fact that Netanyahu releases this information right now is not arbitrary, and it's not just by chance. It's intentional because we want the world to know what the Iranians are actually up to. Now remember, there's a culmination of pressure that's coming down on the Iranians. It's the combination of the humiliation of the war back in June, a combination of the snapback mechanism that really puts a substantial squeeze on them when it comes to sanctions. Add to that the fact that there is now a pursuit of Iranian goods being smuggled across the seas by the mechanism that's related to the snapback system that took place. And add to that the fact that the US, together with Israel, is trying to reshape this region. All of that puts a lot on the plate of the Iranian regime. And what they're doing is scrambling and firing on all cylinders at the same time. They are terrified of a reshaping of this region. They're terrified of a day after Iran where their grip on terrorism and the ability to disrupt this region is diminished dramatically. And that's exactly where we are right now. We're at a turning point, a pivot point in the history of the Middle East. And what we're looking at is that battle taking place in front of our eyes. In the backdrop of the fact that the Iranians are fighting tooth and nail to keep working through the Houthis, pumping money and technology and pressuring them to disrupt as much as they can in this region. At the same time that they're using everything in their power to try to smuggle goods out of Iran into other countries to bring the cash back in. That is all connected to the fact that the US and Israel are about to sign a deal that's Hamas, the neighboring Arab countries, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Syrians, the Lebanese, and several other countries in this region. That is a huge nail in the coffin of the Iranian Islamic regime. And they're terrified about this. And that's why they're responding in such a strong, such an aggressive manner. Because the strengthening of Israel, the strengthening of US agendas and interest in this region means a weakening of Iranian agendas and Iranian power in this region. And where do you see this best? In the subtext spoken in Arabic between the Iranians and other countries in this region, where the Iranians are warning their neighbors, many of them, don't go into this deal. Don't cooperate with the Americans, don't cooperate with the Israelis. They're threatening them, they're persuading them, they're doing everything they can to prevent this very substantial moment from taking place. A moment where the US and Israel interests trump those, pun intended, of the Iranians. And when that happens, that setbacks the Iranian regime and influence on this region many years back. And that is why the response is so strong. So in other words, behind the acts of naval terrorism, the attempts at piracy, the Houthi attacks and drone strikes on Israel and other targets around this region, behind the fact that the Iranians are smuggling oil and doing everything in their power to gain control and strength in this region once more, behind the fact that they're threatening their neighbors in the Gulf to not go into an agreement with the US and with Israel, behind that is the fear of what's about to take place. That moment when the US, Israel, Hamas sign a deal, and that deal is in cooperation with the Jordanians, the Egyptians, and multiple other countries, and co-signed by the Saudis and by the Emiratis and by the Qataris, that moment is a moment the Iranian regime is terrified of. And that's why it's so important for that to take place. That's why now is the money time for the US and all these countries to press as hard as they can to reach an agreement. And that's why the Iranians are going to do everything in their power to disrupt, to bully, to scare until that moment takes place. And that's where we are, ladies and gentlemen, in the money time. We're in sort of the last finishing feet or meters of the race where the Iranians are scrambling to stop the effect and the power move by the US in this region. And we're looking at that take place in live action. This is a reason to pray for what's happening in this region. This is a reason to be optimistic about the chance of something changing for the better in this region once more. Imagine this, a moment of stabilization where the Lebanese people, the Syrian people, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Palestinians in Gaza and Judea and Samaria all have the chance of a better future without the threat of imported terrorism from the Iranians, where Israelis don't have to fear Houthi missiles or drones attacking the country, and where there's a chance to even weaken the Iranian regime to the point where their people might get something better. Now that is something worth fighting for. That is something worth pushing for. That is something that requires the fortitude, the pressure, the grit to really seal the deal. And if anyone can do that, it's the current Trump administration and Netanyahu government in Israel. After 2 years of war, there's a clear moment of resolve, of grit, of stick-to-itiveness in this region, and now is a time to really see the fruit of that come to full fruition. Keep praying for what's happening in Israel, guys. Keep praying for us to be able to share the truth with people around the world, because now is the time where history is made. Now back to Yair Pinto.
Thank you for the precise analysis, Mati. Now, I want to call on you back at home to help us spread the truth. Share this information with your friends. Make sure to hit the comment, leave something good about Boots on the Ground, hit the like button, and hit that subscribe button so that more people will know what's happening in Israel. Now, let's move on to a few quick items about what's happening in Israel's northern arena. On Tuesday morning, the IDF, led by Division 91, launched an airstrike that led to the elimination of the Hezbollah terrorist Mahmoud Ali Issa in the Deir Ames area in southern Lebanon. This evil man served as the local representative of Hezbollah in the village of Kfar Kafra in southern Lebanon and was responsible for the linkage between Hezbollah and the village residents on economic and also on military matters. In other words, he acted to seize private property for terrorist needs, such as renting houses for the storage of weapons and surveillance, but he won't be doing that any longer. In a related story, also on Tuesday morning, the IDF eliminated another terror operative from Hezbollah who was operating engineering equipment in the Zibkin area in southern Lebanon. I've said it before, and I'll say it again now. If Hezbollah order you to take a bulldozer into southern Lebanon, find a way to say no. If you don't, it could be the last mistake that you'll ever make. And moving on, female observers attached to the IDF's Golan Brigade thwarted the smuggling of weapons from Syrian territory into Israeli territory this week. The observers from Battalion 595 identified 2 suspects who attempted to smuggle 5 pistols from Syrian territory into Israeli territory overnight between Monday and Tuesday. They directed troops from the Battalion 7421 of the Golan Brigade to intercept the smugglers and arrest them. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to bring you all the truth about what's happening in Israel. And as always, we invite you to continue and sharing this truth. So please, take a moment, leave a comment, hit the like button, and make sure to subscribe to TBN Israel on YouTube so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And now, we move on to our next story about flotillas, selfies, and people who really need to get a job. We'll start with Swedish activist Greta Thunberg, who was deported from Israel on Monday and was then received as a hero when she got off the plane in Greece a few hours later. She was taken into custody along with the 500 other activists in the Shamud Flotilla, which attempted to run the blockade of the Gaza Strip last Thursday, which was Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement. 2 days earlier, the Foreign Ministry revealed documents seized at the Hamas post in Gaza indicating direct involvement of the terrorist organization in funding and leading this flotilla. The documents show that Hamas promotes anti-Israel activists around the world through an organization called the Popular Conference for Palestinians Abroad, established in 2018 and serving as a representative arm of Hamas terrorists in Western countries. On Tuesday, someone asked Greta about the United States President Donald Trump's statement that she should see a doctor because she has an anger management problem. Greta gave an answer saying, "It seems that you suffer from that as well." In any case, she also spoke with reporters about her brief detention in Israel, saying she could speak at length about the abuse in prison, but when she landed in Greece, she refused to address it and chose instead to speak about what she defined as the genocide taking place in the Gaza Strip. However, even as the deportation of activists who were detained last Thursday as they attempted to run the blockade of the Gaza Strip continues, news has surfaced of another flotilla on its way. At the center of the flotilla is a Turkish ship of the IHH organization, and on its deck, many dozens of activists and Turkish parliament members. The flotilla is supposed to arrive off the shores of Gaza on Wednesday evening, and the Navy is preparing to seize the ship as well as it was done last week. In parallel, Israel is conducting diplomatic contacts to stop this flotilla from leaving at all, and the Americans are also trying to pressure Turkey to stop the sailing of the Turkish ship that is in the flotilla. And security officials in Israel assessed that no weapons were loaded onto the vessels, including the Turkish one, but the IDF refuses to take any chances in planning the operation to seize the ships, and the forces are preparing for an option in which resistance will be used against the Shayetet 13 commando forces, such as it was happened 15 years ago with the Mavi Marmara flotilla. That incident ended with several Navy commandos wounded and Israel suffering tremendous diplomatic and public relations damage. There is concern in Israel that this could be repeated, along with a disruption to the talks in Sharm el-Sheikh to end this war. And here, at TBN Israel, we will continue to bring you all the truth and only the full truth about every subject, so keep spreading it, tell your friends, make sure to hit the like button and hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Now moving on, the United Nations revealed on Tuesday that the Houthi terrorist group in Yemen has kidnapped 9 of its employees. This is one of the series of attacks by the terrorist organization against the United Nations agencies and international organizations since the end of August. And according to a report called by the news portal El Arabiya, there are intensifications in attacks against the UN. In a statement by the United Nations Secretary General spokesperson Stefan Dujarric, it was said that the Secretary General Antonio Guterres strongly condemns the continued arbitrary arrests of United Nations employees and partners, as well as the continued illegal seizure of the United Nations buildings and assets in areas under the Houthi control. He added that recently, the de facto Houthi authorities detained 9 more UN staff members, bringing the total number of United Nations staff arbitrarily detained to 53 since 2021. He explained that these practices by the Houthis undermine the UN's ability to operate inside Yemen and deliver vital assistance. Guterres reiterated his urgent call for the immediate and unconditional release of all UN staff, NGOs, civil society organizations, and diplomatic missions, stressing that these personnel must be respected and protected in accordance with international law. He recalled that the United Nations confirmed last June that the Houthi militia detained 11 of its employees in Yemen as part of a kidnapping campaign that it launched against employees of international and local humanitarian organizations in areas under its control over the previous 2 days. The UN Secretary General spokesperson also said that the United Nations seeks to secure the safe release of all without conditions. Last February, following yet another kidnapping incident of UN employees, the organization announced a temporary suspension of all its activities in Sada government in Yemen after the recent kidnapping of organization staff by the Houthis. Guterres ordered United Nations agencies to cease their activities due to the lack of security conditions and required guarantees. According to a statement from the spokesperson office, following the abduction of 8 additional UN personnel, including 6 working in Sada government. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development in this issue, so keep standing with Israel, share, and most importantly, pray. Yes, pray together for the situation. Make sure to pray for our hostages that are still being held in the Gaza Strip. Pray for wisdom to our leaders. Pray for the IDF soldiers that they will be safe as Hamas is attempting to kidnap them while they're waiting in Gaza for this deal. Make sure to pray for all the innocent lives that are affected by this conflict all across the Middle East and the world. Pray for wisdom. Pray for God's intervention, that the enemies of Israel will have a change of heart and that they will start loving on Israel instead of hating on us. God can make it happen. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.